So to escape from reality? Yeah, I don't need this shit. I am reality. There's the way it ought to be. There's the way it is.
Hello and welcome wherever you may be on the surface of our planet. There's certainly a lot of chaos out there, and can I apologise if there's any background noise today? There are a lot of builders around. I wanted to talk a little bit about the original design of human beings, as Mr. G taught, and its relationship to the structure of the North and South Pole. And I'll make a few notes about Yom Kipur, which is a Jewish celebration that passed last week. And I will read a short chapter from Spengler, Man and Technics. From Gurdjieff's book, then, let's begin. Introducing a perspective that promises nothing very cheerful. I must tell you that in the beginning the beings of that planet had the same presence as those of all the Keschapmartnian three-brained beings arising on all the corresponding planets of the whole of our great universe, and that they also had the same duration of existence as all other three-brained beings. The various changes in their presence began for the most part after the second misfortune had occurred to this ill-fated planet, during which its chief continent, existing under the name of Atlantis, entered within the planet. From that time on, they created all sorts of conditions of external being existence that caused the quality of their radiations to go steadily from bad to worse, and great nature was thus compelled gradually to transform their common presence through various compromises and changes in order to regulate the quality of the vibrations they radiated, which were required chiefly to preserve the being welfare of the former fragment of their planet. And for the same reason great nature gradually increased the number of beings there to such an extent that they are now breeding on all the lands of that planet. The exterior forms of their planetary bodies are all much alike, and of course in respect of size and their other subjective characteristics, each of them is coated just as we are, in accordance with heredity, with the conditions existing at the moment of conception, and with the other factors that serve in general as causes for the arising and formation of every being. They also differ among themselves in the colour of their skin and in the type of hair they have, and these characteristics of their presences are determined, as everywhere else, by the effects of that part of the surface of their planet where they arise, and are formed until they reach responsible age, or as they say, become adult. As for their psyche, its fundamental traits have precisely the same peculiarities in all of them, no matter where they arise. And among these is that special property thanks to which only on that strange planet in the whole of the universe does there occur the horrible process called the process of the destruction of each other's existence, or as they call it on that ill-fated planet, war. Besides this chief particularity of their common psyche, certain properties in each of them, regardless of where they arise and exist, are completely crystallized and become an integral part of their common presence. Properties that exist under the names of egoism, self-love, vanity, pride, conceit, credulity, suggestibility, and many others no less abnormal and unbecoming to the essence of any three-brained being whatsoever. Of these abnormal properties, the most terrible one for them is suggestibility. Sometime I will tell you specially about this extremely strange property of their psyche. Before going into a more detailed explanation of how the higher parts of these beings were coated and perfected in the common presences of the first Ditata cosmoses to arise there, and also of those who were afterward named beings, I must give you some information about the fact that we, beings who arose on the planet Caritas, as well as those who have arisen on your planet Earth, are no longer polymedectic, or as they still said, monoenephytic, as were the first beings who were transformed directly from the Ditata cosmoses. But we are Keschap-Martnian beings, that is, almost half beings, owing to which the completing process of the sacred Heptapar does not take place through us, or through your favourites exactly as it did in them. We are such Keschap-Martnian beings because the last fundamental stop-ender of the sacred Heptapar, which almost all the beings of the megalocosmos now call the sacred Ashagi Protoi Heri, is not situated in the centre of the planets upon which we have arisen, as in general is the case for most of the planets of our great megalocosmos, but is in the centre of their satellites, which for our planet Caritas is the little planet of our solar system called Pnok-Payok, and for the planet Earth is its former fragment, now called the Moon, or Anulios. Thanks to this, the completing process of the sacred Heptapar for the continuation of the species is carried out not through one being, as with the Ditata cosmoses, but through two beings of different sexes, called by us Actavas and Passavas, and on the planet Earth, man and woman. It's difficult material, but I'll just make a couple of notes here. Here Gurdjieff starts talking about the completing process of the Heptapar, how it was adjusted. Elsewhere it says that a being may do something particular during a completing process of a cycle, which changes the direction of the results of that cycle. That's quite important, and it's relevant to the Yom Kippur notes I'll mention in a moment. And so our lives here are very deeply intertwined with the needs of the planet Earth to provide for the moon, its nourishment for its growth. It was a full moon last night, and I was not in a very good mood, but I did glance up at it. I could see that same ethereal glow, as if it was pulling me towards it in a dream, as if I was losing consciousness and starting to drift towards it, roughly speaking. You don't have to tell me how insane all these notions would seem to modern people. Believe me, I do know. Initially, I was having a chat with a friend of mine, and I was just reflecting on the fact that the South Pole, Antarctica, is a solid block of Earth. There is actually a landmass there, a continent, a large continent of the Earth. at the base of the Earth, and the North Pole is free. If there is something there, it is not made of earth. And this reminded me of heaven and earth, the light from above, which is clear, which is like sunlight, and has no physical form, as opposed to the base of the tree that is certainly very solid. And the other continents, of course, Africa is the black continent, and Europe is the white continent, and so on. And there are legends about the people of the north or the far north, the Hyperboreans who came from the pole. And the most interesting thing is that if you live on the North Pole, 1 year becomes 1 day, because for the cycle of a period of light and a period of darkness to pass, it is 365 days. Because they have the polar sun and the polar darkness. And that is why in some very old books that speak about these ancient primordial polar beings, one of their days is taken as one of our years. There may be different types of beings who live on the earth. The people themselves, they revolve around the sun. The sun for them is their god. It is the being that coordinates their lives. 365 days in one rotation. But the next scale up, above the sun, is what Gurdjieff calls the All-Suns, or perhaps it's the Milky Way. It is the group to which our sun belongs. That is the next entity that functions together as an entity, and that has a different timing, that has a higher timing, and perhaps these polar people were living according to that higher time, or perhaps to some intermediary place between the two. Higher time, higher intelligence, higher manifestation. And remember that I pointed out that about Islam, it had fallen, that religion had fallen, so that they were attempting at least to worship the moon. In other words, they were trying to destroy themselves and go downhill, which is an error inside that religion. If we are to make it, we have to enter a higher time, a higher light. We have to choose to enter the orbit of a different kind of world, a different sense of the world, which is very difficult. We must eventually become completely detached from the insanity of this Earth system and tune ourselves to a higher light. That must be the path. Okay, I heard on the news that Yom Kippur had passed last week. No idea about it. Apparently it's the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. It begins in spring, and Yom Kippur is the first 10 days of the 7th month. So it's something like a completing process. It's some part of the completing process of the octave in the Jewish calendar. And what is emphasized during those 10 days? What practices do the Jews do? They do repentance, which means that you consider your life and you try to release what is negative about it. You learn to regret those things that you have not done well. In other words, technically, you are releasing the current world whilst simultaneously trying to reach the higher world at the time of the completion of the octave. That is technically what is happening. And that's what repentance means, as well as bringing yourself to a much higher level of self-understanding. You are trying to release the world that you have lived in with all its low natures. If we compare the different timing systems that exist on the Earth, they spell out very clear information. If we were to follow the sun, we would have a solar calendar, with the solstices and equinoxes being the timing system, and then we would live by the sun. For the sun, the nadir is the winter solstice. But the coldest part of the year, certainly in the UK, is February, which is several months after, just as the sea temperature in the UK is warmest in September, a few months after the summer solstice. The natural environment of the Earth follows after several months. I don't have a perfect answer today, but there are several different centres that you can use as the time. Either the sun, where the nadir is the winter equinox, or the environment of the Earth, where February is the nadir. The Western calendar uses the 31st of December, and it feels to me that psychically Halloween is in fact the nadir, and that's the most important. There's something else very important, which is that an Obivatal man, meaning a good-natured natural man, is still only a two-story being, and so the third story is unused. This is exactly like after Friday, people consider themselves to have no responsibilities on Saturday and Sunday, days with no duties, but that is not the case for a spiritualized third story person who uses the third story period, to do the spiritual vertical work. So you've got the sun timing, you've got the timing of the earth herself, you've got the psychic timing of human beings who live on the earth. And I believe there must be something interlocking about this, which reminds me of Ouspensky's ideas of the three interlocking octaves. So let's talk about Oswald Spengler's book, Man and Technics. It's a very interesting book because it defines the different stages of human evolution from the point of view of what they do, how they interact with tools, with the world, how their intelligence and tools work together to manifest their society. I will read a short chapter, just a couple of pages. Man is no simpleton, naturally good and stupid, not a semi-ape with technical tendencies, as Haeckel describes him and Gabriel Max portrays him. Over these ideas, there still falls the plebeian shadow of Rousseau. No, the tactics of man's living are those of a splendid beast of prey, brave, crafty and cruel. He lives by attacking and killing and destroying. He wills and has willed ever since he existed to be master. Does this mean, however, that Technics is actually older than man? Certainly not. There is a vast difference between man and all other animals. The technique of animals is generic. It is neither inventive nor capable of development. The bee, ever since it existed, has built its honeycombs exactly as it does now, and will continue to build them so till it is extinct. They belong to it as the form of its wing and the colouring of its body belong to it. Genus is a form not of the visible and static, but of mobility, a form not of so being, but of so doing. Bees, termites, beavers, they build wonderful structures. Ants know agriculture, road making, slavery and war management, nursing, fortification, and organized migration. All that man can do, one or another sort of animal has already achieved. And yet, all this has at the bottom nothing whatever to do with human techniques. A general technique is unalterable, instinctive. Animal thought being strictly connected with the immediate here and now, and knowing neither past nor future, knows also neither experience nor anxiety. It is not true that the female animal cares for her young. Care is a feeling that presupposes mental vision into the future, concern for what it is to be, just as regret presupposes knowledge. It is only the demon of classification which brought man close to the apes. It is today coming to be regarded as an overhasty and shallow conclusion. For in the very system itself, man stands off the line and outside of all ordering. He is very primitive in many parts of his bodily structure and freakish in others, but that does not concern us here. It is his life we are studying, and his destiny. In his soul he is an animal of prey. An animal can neither hate nor despair. Its nursing activity is like everything else above mentioned, a dark unconscious response to impulse, such as is found in many types of life. It is a property of the species and not of the individual. Generic technique is not merely unalterable but also impersonal. The unique fact about human techniques, on the contrary, is that it is independent of the life of the human genus. It is the one instance in all the history of life in which the individual frees himself from the compulsion of the genus. One has to meditate long upon this thought if one is to grasp its immense implications. Technics in man's life is conscious, arbitrary, alterable, personal, and inventive. It is learned and improved. Man has become the creator of his tactics of living, that is his grandeur and his doom. And the inner form of this creativeness we call culture. To be cultured, to cultivate, to suffer from culture. Wonderful. And if we consider today the claustrophobic contraction of the United Nations and their digital ID and their vaccine passports and all this contracting, they are becoming obsessed with man being an animal and trying to manipulate him like an ant in a machine. They have lost contact with the light of man's soul, of his brilliance, of his ingenuity, of his desire to be free, to move beyond the physical, which is called religious or spiritual and so on. But I believe a new form of understanding has to happen for man there. We need something new because the old things aren't working. When I spoke of the Jews, their calendar starts in spring. That is an error. It is a limited understanding. They do have great knowledge. Their knowledge is ancient, but it is not as good as the Chinese. Because by the time the green shoots push through the black earth in spring, already they have been nourished. Just like the bear is nourished as he rests quietly in the winter, absorbing the underground returning of life of winter, which is the secret. It is unseen, but it is alive. And the true nadir of the year is in autumn. That is the bottom, the yin max of the year is in autumn. And that is why Halloween is in autumn. Because there at the nadir, there is great separation of the infrahuman forces and the light of heaven. And the infrahuman forces, without the pressure of the light of heaven, they start rising up. And people start to see things and feel things, and then they get the pumpkins out and they dance the Day of the Dead and so on. That is why. Jewish knowledge has a lot of great detail, but it misses some more advanced aspects. For instance, they still sacrifice animals, whereas Christ taught them to sacrifice other things instead, to replace the destruction of animals with a transmutation of their own being energies. And Spengler has a passion for the human spirit, a passion that invigorates the life of that second or third body, that turns a man into a being with 2 bodies or a soul with 3 bodies. One has to have a passion to manifest from there and to overcome the world. But Spengler, he dismissed and overclassified and over-restricted the lives of animals and smaller creatures, condemn an animal to being a machine with no real living energy in it, with no justification. In rare circumstances, they can deserve a name. They can deserve to be named. And when an animal is given a name, then he is. And when Theoden says, "Arise, Erlingers, a sword day, a red day, here the sun rises, death he calls," which is the death of the identification with the flesh and the birth of the sun. Thank you for listening.